This is the Huawei Mate 20 Pro, and it was arguably one of the best devices from 2018, but almost 9 months later after its release, how does this phone look going into the future? The Mate 20 Pro is a combination of some of the best features of any Android phone, along with a few not so great ones, in a package that competes with even their latest P30 Pro at less than half the price. And even after the recent Google ban, it still looks like a solid choice going into the future. A big thank you to Damien Wild for lending me this device to review. Links to his channel are in the description. In terms of the hardware, this phone is among the best builds of any device I've ever used. Huawei knew what they were going for with this device, and the result is one really great looking phone. Whilst the design is not experimental by any means, it does stand out a lot from recent Android phones, mainly because of the dreamy looking reflection patterns of the rear panel. The emerald green is more like a mixture of light blue and sea green, and it changes depending on how light hits it. It really does look great. The phone feels really nice and comfortable to use in the hand with an even weight distribution over the entire device, and thanks to the curved edges leading seamlessly into the metal frame, it feels like a device that should cost a lot more than it does. One of the best but most subtle additions is the slight texture to the rear panel, and this allows for a much greater grip of the device when using it without a case, and that's something that holds up extremely well in today's market of slippery phones. The attention to detail that they've put into making this device look and feel great really has paid off. It's the little touches like the accent power button or the texture to the rear panel that really make this phone great to use, and it's clear that Huawei have tried to make a device that's individual here. And speaking of staying individual, if you're looking for a VPN that can cover all of your internet traffic needs, NordVPN has you covered. With over 5,000 servers in 62 countries, your internet speeds won't even know the difference, and with apps available for every platform that you use, you can browse anywhere on anything with ease. NordVPN encrypts all of your internet traffic to make sure that your data stays secure and safe when you browse the web. Use the code ALEX for 75% off a 3-year plan, and you'll get your first month free, link in the description. One area of this device that hasn't aged as well as the rest is the bezel design around the front. The slightly iPhone looking notch and the chin are the biggest signs that this device is not brand new, but that being said, it's not the worst combination out there. With technology moving towards pop-up cameras or even under-display cameras, this phone's sizable notch doesn't look to be as future-proof as Huawei had hoped. But with a 6.4-inch screen size and 3120 by 1440 resolution, this device's display holds up even to the OnePlus 7 Pro in terms of specs, despite the notch being on this device. The colours from this display are truly amazing, and it has enough dynamic range and brightness to hold up in basically any conditions. With HDR10 and DCI P3 certification, as well as a 19.5:1 aspect ratio, watching movies or any other 21:9 content on this device is where it really shines, and it is just a pleasure to use. My only complaint with this device's display is its use of the space around the notch. The icons occasionally will get a little bit too close or even be cut off by the notch. It's purely a software fault, but it hasn't been changed since its release, so it looks like it's probably here to stay, and that is a little bit irritating. But that being said, this has to be one of the best displays I've ever used. Something that I wasn't expecting is a stereo speaker set, and the sound from this is pretty decent. But because it uses the charging port as the second speaker, the sound when charging is pretty much muted from that side. The screen and speakers are not only great for content viewing, but also for gaming or just about any other task. It really is one of the best display and sound experiences I've ever experienced on an Android device. That was a mouthful. Pushing power to those pixels is a Kirin 980 CPU and a Mali G76 MP10 GPU, both paired with 8GB of RAM. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of judging a device off its spec sheet alone, so everything I say here is based off my personal use case. And so far, it has been hands down flawless. I have yet for it to crash during use, and it is just an absolutely perfect experience pretty much all of the time. For day-to-day use, it really never seems to be anything but snappy, and the same can be said for even the most intensive use. Now, my daily use case isn't intensive by any means, but I'm on the go a lot, so lag or crashing would be an inconvenience, but with this phone, I've had no issues whatsoever. I can switch from my social networking to Spotify or Google Keep or even the camera app with no hesitation or stuttering, which really takes this device to a whole new level. Gaming in apps such as Real Racing 3 or even simpler titles is really great, with pretty much no lag or issues whatsoever. And this performance paired with that display creates one really awesome experience. The in-screen fingerprint scanner isn't the greatest out there, it's a little bit slower than I'd like and it's pretty high up, and because there's no always-on display, it's pretty difficult to judge where you actually need to put your finger. But the facial recognition is insanely fast, and it doesn't just use a photo like OnePlus did with the 6T, it uses the same kind of method that Apple does, storing an equation of your face. EMUI is the OS on this device, and whilst it's not my favourite skins of Android out there, it is still a pretty clean looking software. What I'm not a big fan of is the pre-installed bloatware apps such as the Themes app or the Phone Manager Optimizer, but worst of all, the Mirror app, which is just a selfie camera without a shutter button. It's a little bit confusing. But that being said, EMUI does have a pretty decent looking UI overall. There are a couple of parts that I'm not much of a fan of, the main one being the default launcher, which takes a lot of its looks off iOS, and even though you can choose to have an app drawer in the default launcher, I still find myself happier using Eevee Launcher for a more stock Android experience. There are some really great features of EMUI, especially the battery efficiency, but I'm just not a big fan of the skin overall. But that being said, the dark mode really does make it a whole lot better. The cameras are possibly the biggest selling point for this device, and they're almost amazing. On the back there's three main lenses, a 40 megapixel wide angle, 16 megapixel ultra wide lens, and an 8 megapixel telephoto camera. And the photos from these may not be as visually pleasing as the photos from my Pixel 2 XL, but the flexibility of having 3 focal lengths to choose from is probably the best addition to any phone I've ever used, and single sensor phones have pretty much now been ruined for me because of this device. Thank you, Huawei. The 18mm equivalent telephoto camera is not really the best quality. At only 8 megapixels, the images appear a little bit softer than I'd like, so I do find myself using this less than I would if they were a little bit sharper. And a lot of the photos that this device takes do look a little bit over-sharpened, but it's nothing too drastic. Overall, the colour representation and the general look of these photos from the device is pretty damn great. Something I found particularly interesting is the ability to switch between focal lengths whilst recording video, which really changes the game when shooting video on a smartphone. However, there is no 4K 60 here, which is a little bit disappointing. Interestingly, the telephoto lens is the only one to have OIS, and it does appear a lot more stable than the others, but it's still pretty soft. Now, it's clear that the hardware on this phone is pretty damn awesome. Those cameras with all the different smart photo modes within the camera app, the excellent build quality and the display, but the problem with this phone lies in the uncertainty of its future software support. Now, for the sake of keeping this video semi-future-proof, I've put the latest on the Google ban in the description. If Huawei still has the Google ban when you're watching this video, that means this device won't get Android Q or any future Google updates, which is a pretty big deal breaker. And although Huawei have said that they'll continue security support with their current devices, it will be stuck at Android P unless Huawei release their own OS or the ban is lifted anytime soon. Now, my initial thoughts when I heard about this was, oh, I could just flash a custom ROM for Android Q as soon as that's released, but ROM support for this phone is pretty lacking. In fact, there's probably about 2 ROMs on XDA developers that I could actually find, both of which are Android P, so looking into the future, it doesn't look like Lineage OS or Resurrection Remix or any of the closer to stock Android ROMs will get anywhere near Android Q for this device, and that pretty much destroys its software future. But if Huawei have this ban lifted, it really could make this device a seriously great choice for anyone right now. The hardware is amazing, the existing software is good, and even if it doesn't get Android Q, the significant reduction in price on the used market because of this ban could make this phone actually compete with phones like the Pocophone F1, because I've seen them getting as low as £280 on eBay, and that is pretty hard to argue with. But looking into the future, I see no reason why this phone can't be a good device. Even at Android P, it is such a great device to use, it may not even need Android Q. And who's to say what could happen in the future? Huawei could get their ban lifted, there could be custom ROMs developed with Android Q. So honestly, if you're looking to pick up one of these phones, I can just highly recommend it. Even on Android P, it is such a good device.